I wasn't supposed to find this. Not in the university archives. Not in the stack marked Ecclesiastical Surveys, Midwest Holdings, 1800 to 1850. It should have been just another late evening of cataloging in the sub-basement of Hollowell Library, my usual corner of musty tomes and brittle parchment. But there it was. A ledger wrapped in oilcloth, tucked behind the loose backboard of drawer number 114, misfiled under West Indiana Parish Registries. Except it wasn't a parish registry. I knew that before I even undid the tie. The cloth was damp, oddly sticky, and the string had been double-knotted in a sailor's hold. The pages inside, parchment, not paper, bled a scent of mildew, iron, and something sour like fermented apples. The ink had browned with age, but the entries were legible enough. There was no title. Just a page number, 2, the first had been torn out. Beneath that, scrawled in a curling 19th-century hand, Margaret's admission, May 3, 1823. That name. I'd already seen it twice that week, once in a rejected paper by a graduate student, and again in a footnote about a defunct rural asylum outside Zanesville, Ohio. Both times, the context was vague. Margaret H. in the paper. Just in the footnote. But the year matched. Something tugged. Not curiosity, obligation. Like a thread had looped around my spine and was now pulling tight. I kept reading. The entries weren't sermons or accounts. They were evaluations. Diagnoses, maybe? Always dated, never signed. Some redacted. One read, patient's tongue split. Self-inflicted. Language unknown. Must not speak near the others. Another. Refuses communion. Claims he is already in me. Prescribed saltwater regimen. Dr. Cartwright declined follow-up. I flipped ahead, fingers trembling despite the damp. There were medical diagrams stitched into the binding with horsehair thread, mouth, womb, tongue, all labeled in Latin and inked with trembling hands. I stopped when I found a page entirely blacked out with charcoal, the only word left untouched in the bottom right corner. Doctrine. The rest was smeared, as if someone had scrubbed the page with an open palm. The scent on this one was stronger. Burnt lye. Something chemical. Maybe even embalming fluid. When I lifted the book, I noticed something etched into the wood beneath it, barely visible under layers of lacquer and dust. Room 11, St. Margaret's Hollow. The phrase meant nothing to me. I scribbled it down, thinking it might be a hospital wing or a parish schoolhouse. A Google search came up blank. Even the library database returned only one result, an 1843 property ledger, unregistered, for a St. Margaret's Hollow, 11 miles east of the Ohio River Bend. No coordinates. No tax records. It wasn't even on the county plats. But here's what pushed me past curiosity and into obsession. I took the ledger to our university's preservationist, just routine protocol. She called me 90 minutes later, panicked. "I'm sorry," she said. "I won't be able to help with that. I suggest you return it." When I asked why, she whispered, barely audible over the line. 3 pages in, I saw my grandmother's name. She died in 1993. This ledger is dated 1823. Please don't call again. She hung up. Now I can't stop thinking about that word. Doctrine. What doctrine? Why was Margaret admitted? And why were 3 physicians, men of medicine in a time of leeches and phrenology, so disturbed they refused to treat her? This isn't about folklore anymore. This is institutional. Covered up, buried deep, and nearly lost to time. And I'm going to uncover it, even if I shouldn't. It was called St. Margaret's Hollow School for Girls, established in 1818 under the joint auspices of the First Church of the Covenant and the State Board for Moral Education of Ohio. On paper, it was a progressive initiative for its time, a boarding institution for orphaned or unfit girls, ages 7 to 15, aimed at reforming the wild mind and restoring the Christian feminine spirit. According to a yellowed government pamphlet I found in the Ohio State Archives, St. Margaret's Hollow provides not merely shelter but salvation. Here, the morally lost are returned to virtue through instruction, silence, and structure. That word, silence, repeats across nearly every document I've found. It's not just poetic. It was policy. The school was located outside Zanesville, Ohio, in a limestone gully known locally as Witch's Elbow, a name never acknowledged in formal maps. The hollow was built into the rock face itself, designed in a U-shape with towering spires and a subterranean chapel at its base. The chapel was called Sanctum Vox, or the Sacred Voice. Except, according to architectural schematics from 1821, no chapel exit was ever constructed. The founder, Reverend Elias Finch, was a Civil War chaplain turned educator. A moralist with a fascination for sound theology. Literally. His journals, portions of which are preserved in the Finch Papers at Muskingum College, describe an obsession with resonance, the frequencies of purity, and something he called divine attunement. In a letter dated June 10, 1822, he wrote to a local bishop. Some girls arrive with fractured voices, dissonant, unnatural. But if they are emptied, if made hollow, the doctrine may echo through them uncorrupted. This is not metaphor. The term doctrine keeps reappearing. Sometimes capitalized, sometimes circled. Always in relation to voice correction, internal discipline, or unvoicing. The records get thinner after 1825. Dozens of names are listed under admissions. Almost none under discharges. A facility audit from 1831, signed by the state commissioner, ends with this line: recommend further inspection. Uncertain how 47 girls were housed with only 19 beds. No grave plots found on record. No family contacts available. And then silence. No further audits. No lawsuits. No news articles. St. Margaret's Hollow was quietly delisted in 1835 and struck from the registry in 1837. The building was sold to a private buyer and later collapsed in a rockslide, according to a 1902 geological survey. But no records of that buyer exist. No photographs. Not even a death toll. One of the few surviving names from the admission logs is Margaret Hale, age 13, admitted May 3, 1823, the same date and name from the ledger I found. I tracked down a census from 1850. The Hale family is listed, parents for siblings. Margaret's name is there. But hers is struck through. A note beside it reads, removed voice unfit. I interviewed a local historian in Zanesville, a man in his 70s named Darrell Reese. He claimed he once explored the remnants of the hollow with a church group in the 1960s before the cave was sealed by the state. He remembered only this. There were these pews built into the stone, like teeth. And the air was wrong. Like when you walk into a cave and it exhales first. The deeper I dig, the more it becomes clear, St. Margaret's wasn't a school. It was a vessel. A system designed to erase. But erase what? Why silence children under the guise of salvation? And who, or what, was meant to echo inside the hollow they left behind? It began with the letters. I found them in a shoebox-sized tin, rusted shut and hidden beneath a loose plank in the wreckage of what was once the West Wing dormitory, now little more than ivy-choked stone and rotted floorboards. The tin contained exactly 11 letters, all dated between 1822 and 1824. All addressed to my mother. All signed with different names, Abigail, Ruth, Eliza, Marion, and yet, all written in the same meticulous hand. The paper was brittle, yellowed at the folds. The ink, however, was sharp and recent, too recent. When I tested a sample under UV at the university lab, the technician frowned. This isn't 19th century ink. Not even close. Maybe 5 years old. 10 at most. That was impossible. Even more disturbing was the content. All 11 letters followed the same structure. I am well. My voice is clean. I remember the lessons. The silence is warm. I do not miss my old name. Each repeated that final line verbatim. I do not miss my old name. But one letter broke the pattern. Near the end, the writer had added a rushed, uneven line in pencil, smudged, almost erased entirely. My name was Margaret. Don't let them tell you different. The name had been struck through, violently, as if someone had scraped it with a knife until the wood of the tin beneath tore. In the same dormitory, I found something carved into a bedpost. We write to remember. They make us rewrite. I reached out to a descendant of one of the staff members listed in the 1824 census, a woman named Tabitha Gray, registered as a domestic aide. Her great-great-grandson, Matthew Gray, lived 2 towns over. A quiet man in his 60s who met me at his back porch over coffee. I was raised not to ask about her, he said. All I knew was she worked at the Hollow and came back mute. Literally. Never spoke again. They said it was nerves. But my grandfather said she used to scream in her sleep, not words. Just music. Discordant, like a tuning fork snapping. I asked if she ever wrote anything down. He disappeared into the house and returned with a tattered notebook. Just pages of names. Hundreds of them. Written over and over in faded graphite. The same dozen names, repeating. All girls. Margaret. Ruth. Eliza. Abigail. Marion. But in some places, the names faded mid-word. Then returned in a different hand. She'd just sit for hours writing. Sometimes stop. Look confused. Start over like she didn't recognize the paper. The most chilling page showed the same name, Margaret, scratched over until the page tore. I returned to the Hollow the next day, drawn by a detail I hadn't noticed before, an unmarked doorway carved into the rear foundation. Behind it, a spiraling stone stairwell led to a sunken chapel space, mostly collapsed. But one room remained intact. It was a narrow chamber filled with wooden storage cubbies, each labeled with a number, not a name. Inside were unclaimed suitcases. Dozens of them. Dusty, untouched. Each had a small tag tied to the handle. The tags had no names. Only the words. Voice received. Doctrine acknowledged. Silence in full. One case was open. Inside were a child's black shoes, a locket with nothing inside, and a folded paper. I opened it slowly. Blank. As I stood there, the air grew colder, but not threatening. Just empty. And then I heard it, from the chapel down the hall, a soft sobbing. Not violent. Just resigned. Human. But when I entered, the room was empty. Pews overturned. Hymnals crumbling. The sound stopped. A silence so complete, it felt carved into the stone. They weren't killed. They were hollowed, names peeled away like old paint, voices swallowed whole. And someone, or something, was still listening for echoes. I shouldn't have gone back. Not after the suitcase room. Not after the letters. But something in me needed to know how deep it all went, not just metaphorically, but literally. The blueprints I'd found in the Muskingum archives were dated 1819 and marked. Not for public record. They showed an extensive substructure beneath St. Margaret's Hollow, deeper than any typical school foundation. At least 4 underground levels, connected by stairwells that weren't visible from the surface, and a vertical shaft labeled only E. No explanation. No destination. It took me 3 days to find the entrance, a dislodged section of limestone behind the collapsed chapel wall. Just beyond it, a narrow stone tunnel, damp and uneven. The scent hit first, not just mold or earth, but something sterile, chemical, sweet. Like a hospital that's been abandoned too long. I followed the tunnel downwards. The air thickened. My flashlight flickered once, then stabilized. At the base, I found a room with no windows, no corners. The architecture curved in on itself, a perfect oval of smooth stone. The acoustics were disorienting, even my breath came back to me warped and distant, like it belonged to someone else. In the center, a stone chair facing nothing, bolted to the floor. Etched into the back wall were these words. Only in silence can the vessel open. Only the hollow may carry the sound. To the left of the room, I found an iron door. It shouldn't have opened, but it did. Behind it was a narrow passage of mismatched tiles and warped angles, leading to what must have once been a ritual observation ward. Rusted gurneys. Metal restraints. Walls scored by fingernails. One table was labeled Sensory Attunement, Class B. Nearby, a tray still held the remains of a cracked glass bottle labeled Laudanum plus ash. Then I found the mirror. It was mounted at head height, streaked with decades of grime. I shone my light on it. My reflection didn't follow immediately. It was delayed, just a second or two behind, then moved slightly differently. A half-breath out of sync. Like I was watching someone remembering me. I don't remember turning away, but I found myself walking back into the stairwell. Only it didn't lead up anymore. I walked for several minutes before realizing the angle was subtly downward. When I returned to the mirror room, or what I thought was the mirror was gone. Replaced by a recess in the wall where it looked like something had recently been pried free. That was when the candles lit themselves. Along the corridor's edge, embedded sconces flared one by one with dull blue flames. No heat, no smoke. Just faint hissing, like breathing through clenched teeth. I turned in a slow circle. That was when I saw it, a figure, not flesh, but an impression in the stone at the far end of the corridor, as if something massive had once pressed itself against the wall and vanished. I reached out. The stone was warm. Above it, carved in unsteady letters, Margaret was the first to open. We only had to listen. Back at the university, I found a journal fragment, unsigned, no date. Just a loose page tucked in the back of the ledger. Silence is not absence. It is invitation. The walls drink what we discard. In time, they return it. I think that's what this place is, not haunted, not cursed, but filled. Saturated. It doesn't echo because it's empty. It echoes because something is still speaking from within the stone. I was wrong to think St. Margaret's Hollow was a singular horror, a buried cruelty isolated in the hills of Ohio. The truth came from the ledgers I had overlooked. Specifically, a second volume, hidden beneath the false bottom of the suitcase marked Doctrine Acknowledged. The pages were warped, marked not with student notes or prayers, but with maps. Maps of the American Northeast and Midwest, each dotted with small crosses and hollow circles, annotated in Latin and German. Names scrawled beside them: St. Agatha's Threshold, PA, the Belhaven Choir, New York, Chapel of Cleansing Vale, IL, Grace Reclamation Home, KY. All of them listed as closed. None of them listed in any official state record. Beside the map was a directory titled Voice Work Facilities Tier 2, Confirmed Silence Hubs. There were 43 entries. St. Margaret's was number 12. Each listing came with a date, an administrator's name, and an emblem, a stylized eye with a cracked iris, encircled by a veil. It matched the carving I had seen on the underside of the chapel pulpit. What chilled me most wasn't the number of sites. It was the fact that they coordinated transfers. A different file, marked Logistics, contained student records. Margaret Hale, originally admitted to Belhaven Choir, New York, transferred to St. Margaret's Hollow. For deeper resonance preparation. Another, Clara Sutter, moved from Grace Reclamation Home to a facility in New Orleans, noted with a red stamp. Refused cleansing. Retained for audit. These weren't orphanages. They were audition chambers. The children weren't just being silenced. They were being selected, refined, shaped into something pure enough to carry resonance. Who was behind this? The final folder answered that. Pasted inside was a crest, the cracked eye again, now flanked by 5 veils, beneath it, an inscription in Latin. Ut silentium loquator. Let the silence speak. The overseeing body, the Order of the Fifth Veil. I cross-referenced that name obsessively. It didn't appear in any church registry, but fragments popped up in inquisitorial documents from the Vatican, redacted FBI cult investigations, and 1903 psychiatric case studies from rural Vermont. Always peripheral. Always disappearing just before exposure. But there was one hit I hadn't expected, from my own family. A genealogy search revealed that my great-grandmother, Eliza Halberd, had been admitted to the Sisters of Stillness, a facility outside Boston in 1912. Closed after a fire in 1915. All children unaccounted for. Among the archives of that facility, now part of a digital university collection, was a group photo. 21 girls in identical white gowns, standing in a semicircle around a black-robed woman. One girl stood apart, gaze tilted slightly down, shoes unlaced, fingers threaded behind her back. Her face was unmistakable. It was my grandmother. Age 10. Caption, Class 7. The Carrying Choir. She never spoke of her childhood. Claimed she was raised in an Anglican orphanage that burned down. The same woman appears in a second photograph, from St. Agatha's, dated 1939. No caption. But the robe is the same. The symbol on the wall behind them is clear. She didn't escape the system. She joined it. This isn't just a ghost story. It's a network. A lineage. An organization spanning centuries, repurposing children like tuning forks, waiting for one to resonate correctly, whatever that means to them. I used to think evil rotted from the center. But this rot spread outwards, deliberate, systemic, choreographed. And it's still moving. Still building. I found the child in the subchamber beneath the choir vault, one level below where the original stairwell collapsed. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shackled or screaming. She just sat cross-legged on the cold stone floor, her small hands resting in her lap like she'd been taught to wait. She said her name was Evelyn. And then she added, "But that's not what they call me anymore." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. The walls seemed to eat it before it reached my ears. Behind her stood a rusted recording device, cobbled together from reel-to-reel tape and cathedral piping. It was still running, powered somehow, the reels spinning in silence, capturing something that didn't belong to sound. "I've been good," Evelyn said. "I learned to carry it." "Carry what?" She paused. Looked past me. Then whispered, "What comes when the world is quiet enough to listen?" I followed her gaze. On the far wall, written in childlike strokes of ash, were the words, "Do not call it back." It never left. That's when I heard it again, the low, tonal hum vibrating through the stone. Not sound. Pressure. Like a voice shaped only for bone. The same I had felt near the mirror, near the chapel, near the suitcase room. It hadn't been haunting the place. It was the place. That was when I understood. Evelyn was next. Another vessel. Another Margaret. Another child hollowed out for something too old to speak a language we'd recognize. I carried her out. She didn't resist. We emerged into the moonlight near the old bell tower, its base split by root and frost. In my pack I carried the registry, the photos, the maps, the full proof of the Order of the Fifth Veil and its centuries of silent, systemic abuse. Everything needed to expose the entire network. Names, places, affiliations. Enough to burn it all down. But Evelyn, this girl who had survived things I couldn't begin to understand, tugged at my coat. "Will it matter if I get out?" she asked, eyes wide, rimmed with dark circles. "If they don't stop, will I just be the loudest hollow?" Behind us, the wind passed through the crumbled chapel walls like a sigh. That was the choice. Expose everything, and Evelyn becomes evidence. Another case. Another file. Her name dragged through years of hearings, doubt, and debate. Or bury it all. Seal the hollow again. And let a few escape the echo. I thought of my grandmother. Of the suitcase room. Of the children whose names I would never recover. I made my choice. I took Evelyn to my car. Gave her a new name. I dropped her off at a shelter under an alias, with enough money to vanish. She asked me not to follow. I never did. Then I returned to the hollow one last time. To the vault. To the archives. To the cursed infrastructure. I stacked the files. All of them. The ledgers, photos, transfer logs, census cross-references, tape reels. I lit a match. The flame took quickly, silent as breath. It cast tall shadows on the stone walls, making them seem like they were swaying, like something deeper was moving just out of sight. As I turned to go, one candle remained upright on the altar, still lit from a past ritual. I let it burn. I did not blow it out. Some things, like guilt, are meant to burn slow. Some things deserve silence. The official report labeled it an accidental fire, caused by faulty wiring in a residual substation beneath a condemned chapel foundation. The language was clinical, efficient. The headline in the Zanesville Courier read, "Historic ruins lost to blaze, and no injuries reported." No mention of children. No mention of the order. No mention of the bones unearthed near the vault, or the names etched into stone then scratched out with nails. The state took over the site within 48 hours. A task force arrived, not emergency responders, but agents in charcoal suits. No badges. No visible credentials. The area was cordoned off, declared unsafe for reconstruction. By the time I returned with a journalist's friend, the grounds had already been flattened under gravel and fencing. A single sign had been erected. Future site of Zanesville Clean Energy Initiative. But I know what was missed. Or ignored. In the center of what used to be the sanctuary, half buried beneath scorched limestone, someone had placed a child's sketch, protected in a plastic sleeve. Crude, but chillingly precise, a row of children holding hands, faces blank. Behind them, a tall figure without eyes, arms outstretched like branches. Above them, a single word in block letters. Quiet. When I tried to retrieve it, a worker stopped me. "All artifacts have been claimed," he said. By whom, he didn't say. Later, in a private archive donated by an anonymous source, I found a final misfiled folder, buried in records from a 1915 fire in Boston. Inside were 3 documents from St. Margaret's Hollow, inexplicably preserved, a birth certificate with the name Margaret Hale, but no date or parish seal. A staff roster with all names crossed out except one. E. Finch, inherited custodian. A faded, torn page from a prayer book, margins covered in child's handwriting. "If I forget my name, will the silence still know me?" There were no surviving photographs. No trace of the tape reels. Nothing provable. Only a silver locket, melted at the hinge, found near the ruins. Inside, a curled photo of a girl. Her eyes scratched out. A single word carved into the metal behind the photo. Echo. That locket now rests in a sealed box at the bottom of my filing cabinet, a cabinet I haven't opened in weeks. I still hear the tones sometimes. When everything in the house is silent, no hum, no traffic, no breath. A soft, vibrating frequency beneath the floorboards and the spine. Like a whisper trying to remember itself. The horror, I've come to realize, wasn't what they did. It was how well they erased it. The system didn't just hollow the children. It hollowed the memory of them. It made the silence so total, even grief couldn't echo back. I wasn't supposed to find this. But I did. And now I keep listening. Not for the voices. But for the moment the silence begins to listen back. 03